Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. We're here today, it's so funny when you undertake a study, you think like, hey, this is an interesting idea. And then it takes you a while to do this study, and you work with colleagues, and you've got the results, and you're writing it up. And then the problem that you were trying to solve arrives externally from circumstances entirely outside your control. When we decided to do this project, we were thinking about the imperatives in the United States around remobilizing the defense industrial base. We talk a lot about that here at CSIS, and we'll hear a little bit about CSIS views on that issue from a sort of military readiness standpoint, but very little about its connection to the broader US industrial base and the systems that undergird it, including our energy system. Of course, in the meantime, over the last 3 weeks, we've seen the conflict pairing Israel and the United States against Iran, using all of the kinds of resources we're talking about building in a remobilization. Air interceptors, missiles, things that are heavy in electronics and aluminium. And so our paper arrives at a moment where the conversation about reinvigorating the defense industrial base is being forced by external events, but we've already done some of the work on what the energy infrastructure needs of remobilization might be. So I'm very grateful that we have this work at hand, and hopefully in the course of today's discussion and in the coming weeks and months, we're able to bring some of these policy recommendations to the government as we try to navigate the broader security and strategic moment in which we find ourselves. I'm Joseph Mikett. I'm the Director of the Energy Security and Climate Change Program here at CSIS. That was me following my media training. Talk about the lead and then introduce yourself. For those who are joining us in person, you're most welcome here at CSIS. Thank you for braving the cold. Your comfort and safety are our utmost priority. Should you need anything, please find a CSIS staff member for assistance. And if there's an alarm, please follow the exit signs through the front of the building. Our rally point is across the street, and it will then be my obligation to buy us all ice cream as an apology. And for those who are joining online, we welcome you into the conversation. We should have an opportunity toward the end for discussion of the report, its results, its implications, and we want those who are joining online live to be a part of that conversation as well using the question box. Our work on energy infrastructure and the defense industrial base really sprang from work we started several years ago about energy infrastructure and the broader industrial base. We wrote a paper, Strategic Equilibrium, which looked at how the US was looking to energize the manufacturing renaissance that we are seeing in BLS construction of manufacturing facilities data. At that time, we were talking about batteries, we were talking about semiconductors, and that work was sponsored by the American Gas Foundation. And we were so successful, both intellectually and thinking about the policy implications of the challenges we were talking about, that AGF again was able to partner with CSIS and extend the work to the defense industrial base, and which led us to this report today. I'd like to invite Karen Harbert, the president and CEO of AGF, up to the stage to offer some remarks and share her views on the moment we find ourselves in, and then we will commence with the rest of the program. Please welcome Karen.
Well, welcome everybody that is in the room. I see we had to bring some extra chairs in, so that's always a good sign. And to those online, welcome as well. And thank you, Joseph, to CSIS for undertaking this work. To the teams you see up there, Alex and Raj, who were key partners in pulling off what you just said, which is it's not just an excellent work, it's very, very timely.
Yeah.
So we're proud to be in this moment, and AGF is proud to support this work, and we look forward to future partnerships as we expand our aperture on different things that the energy system relates to. But this report further confirms that energy infrastructure is essential to the defense industrial base. I think simply put, and given the lens that CSIS has put on this, energy security is national security. And that is now back, I think, center stage. As Joseph and us, we all head off to Houston next week for CERA Week. I suspect that the themes of CERA Week might change and be a little bit more about the very subject of this report. In an era of increasing conflict, you already referenced the Middle East and Iran, we need to be economically stable, and we need to be combat ready. And energy is essential to achieving both of those objectives, especially natural gas, which is a focus of this report, both as a feedstock, but also empowering the power grid of the future. I'd like to harken back to 2003, which was the beginning of the Iraq War. If we think back to that time, natural gas prices were $9.22. That's adjusted for inflation. Today, they're $3.07. And back in 2003, we were obviously importing a lot of our natural gas. Today, we are the largest producer and the largest exporter. So what a turnaround we have seen in the natural gas business and the energy system as a whole. Our military-industrial complex demands a reliable, resilient source of energy. And the American natural gas industry and the utilities can deliver that reliability and that resiliency. We stand ready to ensure those objectives and make the necessary investments. And you make reference to the amount of investment that's going to be needed to achieve those. But in order to do that and make the investments that are required, we need policy reforms that this report offers up, and we hope that we have discussions, further discussions, with government officials. We need to modernize our permitting process. When it takes 10 years to permit a project, but 10 months to build it, we've got a problem, Houston. So we need to be able to make those changes to make the mission that is required of us in this very moment realizable. We have to build more pipelines so that our military and our broader economy has access to the energy when they need it, where they need it, and how they need it. And the natural gas industry stands ready to do that. But we also need some other things. We need more natural gas storage. We just came out of the storm, Storm Fern, and we set a new record for natural gas demand in this country, and we met it. We didn't lose a customer. But we realized that in order to meet future Ferns and future compounding problems, that we're going to need to build more storage so that we can meet not just our own domestic needs and a growing economy and a challenged defense industrial base, but also meet the needs of our allies around the world that we can supply LNG to. And we have proven we can walk and chew gum at the same time by delivering here domestically in a time of significant weather disruption while also satisfying the needs of our partners and allies. The other thing we need to do, and it's recognized in this report, is we need to avoid ill-conceived policies and regulations that seek to constrict the use of natural gas, particularly the ill-conceived idea that we're going to ban natural gas in federal buildings, especially military installations. At a time that we are in, the idea of backing that out of the system really is quite inconceivable. Let's just close with the fact that we're blessed to have an abundant resource here in natural gas. Now's the time to unleash it, empower it, and support our military industrial base. So I thank you for the work, and we look forward to the continued discussion today, but certainly into the future as we face more geopolitical challenges, so to speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. A second delight of working at an institution like CSIS is you don't have to be seconded to only your area of expertise. We've got the world's leading scholars across geopolitics, defense, maybe energy. And this report and the work we're doing is a combination of expertise and insights from our energy program and the defense and security program here at CSIS. So I would like to invite Jerry McGinn, the director of the Center for Industrial Base and a senior fellow here at CSIS, to give us a little bit of picture of where we actually stand when it comes to making the things that allow the U.S. to be secure and to project its power around the world as a prelude to our conversation on the energy needs of the defense industrial base. Jerry, please come up. Thanks so much.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much, Joseph. Karen, thanks very much for your remarks and for your support. And it's great to be here. I joined CSIS about 6 months ago, and a little more than that. So I was, this study was ongoing before I joined, but I'm really excited. I was excited to read the report, and very much dovetails with some of the things I'm going to talk about today. So let me pull from a report that I did a couple of years ago and give you a little excerpt to get you into the scene. Okay? It is March 2026 in the South China Sea, and we are at war. preemptive Chinese attacks on Taiwan and U.S. forces across the Pacific, U.S. and allied military forces respond with air, sea, land, and space assets. While the initial Chinese attacks are rebuffed, the losses to U.S. and allied aircraft, ships, and other assets are dramatic. Replenishing the systems, munitions, and drones used, damaged, or lost in the first 2 weeks of combat will take months. The balloon has gone up. It's an old World War I expression of when conflict starts. But the U.S. and allied industrial bases are not fully mobilized, despite the production, supply chain, and sustainment challenges demonstrated during the 2020 COVID-19 pandemic, as well as in providing support to Ukraine after the 2022 Russian invasion. What happens now? And so that teed off a report that I looked at, all aspects of how do we mobilize principally the defense or industrial base to meet some of these challenges and get ready for these challenges today. As you noted in the snippet, I talk about March 2026, which is today. The good news is that people are really starting to think about this scenario. There's been lots of tabletop exercises across CSIS, across the Department of Defense or Department of War, across the U.S. government, looking at these challenges. How do we work on these challenges? The bad news is we've been talking about this for several years now. I wrote this report in 2024. Here we are, 2026. We are not fun, and Iran has shown current events, as Joseph, and Karen talked about, have shown the challenges are here today, and we're still not, we're still having lots of challenges. But we've had the COVID pandemic, we've had Ukraine, and now Iran, but we're still sort of stuck in this mindset that we're at 1939, and we had got a couple of years to get ready for a conflict. The fact of the matter is, we don't know that. And so it's important to really kind of look at all aspects of how we prepare for a national security shock like we have today. And that's why this report is so timely. Let me just take a minute and just talk about what's happening in the news today. There's a question: do we have enough missiles? And we did a show on this, our show all about the base, unpaid advertising, sorry. What we looked at is, and the fact of the matter is, the president and the Secretary of War are correct in that we have enough for what conflict facing us right now. But if China were to do the scenario that I outlined, that we've pulled out Patriots from Korea, we've pulled out theater air defense from some of these places. Would we have enough there? It's very, 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 very doubtful. So that's where the challenges are. You saw about the president met with some of the CEOs of big companies recently. There are plans underway to quadruple production of some of these munitions that we use. The president seems to use time and time again. It doesn't matter the Republican or Democrat, but they get used. So, and that's great. But I'm also coming to the view that we're never really going to have enough. So we really have to get on our wartime footing. And the Secretary of Defense Hegseth said this last fall when he launched this new strategy for acquisition. And he said that we got to get on a wartime footing. But you know how much we were spending on defense as a percentage of GDP during World War II? Over 20%. You know how much we were spending as a percentage of GDP during the Korean War? Around 10%. In Vietnam, about 8 to 9%. During most of the Cold War, we were spending 5 to 6% of our GDP on defense. How much are we spending today on defense as a percentage of GDP? 3%. All right? And that's been pretty steady since it's uptick now. And if the president's budget submission is as he's outlined, we could get closer up towards that area. But the fact of the matter is we haven't been investing. And as Karen talked about, we certainly haven't been investing in a lot of our, and the report talks about, have not been investing in our infrastructure in a lot of areas. That's the kind of work that we do here at the Center for the Industrial Base and across CSIS. And if you notice, our name is not the Center for the Defense Industrial Base. Our name is not the Center for the U.S. Industrial Base. It's the Center for the Industrial Base. Because what we look at 4 main areas. One is we look at U.S. federal and DOD challenges impacting our industrial base. And that's exactly what this issue is. We look at industrial base trends. How much are government agencies spending on innovation? How much are we spending on infrastructure? These kind of things that really kind of measure kind of what we're doing as a government and how industry is participating. Number 3, we look at government industry incentives. How do we change the game on the collaboration between government and industry? We can appropriate more money. That's the traditional way. But I think we've sort of seen the limits of that. We cannot appropriate our way out of a lot of challenges. We've got significant debts. So how do we get private sector more engaged? How do we create different kind of asymmetric financial advantages? Loan programs, discounted loan programs sponsored by government, accelerated depreciation, these kind of incentives that will get private capital in the game in addition to government investment. That's what's happening across the Department of Defense, and I'm sure that's happening as well in some of the other federal agencies. And then a final area that we focus on is international industrial collaboration, how we work well with others. This is not sitting around a table, but this is investing in our overall security needs. Now, if you look, even today, the U.S. is investing in buying 7 icebreakers for the Department of Defense. 2 of those first are going to be built in Finland because they have the expertise and they know how to do it. They're going to train our workforce, which we're then going to build in Alabama, right? We're going to build the other 5 in Alabama. But guess who? That shipyard's an old shipyard. Guess who bought that shipyard? A Canadian company. So there you've got a Canadian company, and the U.S. is working with the Finns on a U.S. program, right? So for all the kind of the talk about the president's rhetoric, the fact of the matter is we've got some deals that we really do industrial collaboration across borders, and that's really important. That continues and grows. That's why I'm really excited about today's event and about the report, because an area which, the scenario I'll talk to you about, the area that is not really talked about is what happens after the first 2 weeks. Everyone goes, we're out of Schlitz, we're out of weapons, but who's going to resupply them? Who's going to repair them? What's the energy that's going, how are they going to get there by ship? And then what you all talk about is the next level. What happens at home? No one's looking at that, so it's really timely that you all are here, and because we got to keep the lights on, and I want to thank you for your great work, for your support, Karen, your team, and I'll turn it back over to Joseph.
Thank you, Jerry. Thank you, Karen. I think that set the scene very nicely. Just 2 notes. Jerry brings up wartime spending in World War I, World War II, Korean War. In those periods, the United States was a growing industrial power, and one of the sources of concern, especially during World War I, was actually energy shortage for wartime production. And in World War II, in 1939, the USG actually did a study looking at what were going to be the needs of wartime production to get ahead of potential energy shortages. So as we industrialized and sort of shifted so much industrial production to defense purposes, we were able to grow electricity and energy consumption in the United States without losing reliability or causing delays. And that series of events was one of the inspirations for us thinking about working on this project. I have the obligation to speak briefly about the report itself, just to kind of set the scene, and then we're going to bring up my 2 co-authors to talk about the details and some of the implications. But the basic idea of this report was to say, okay, what does it mean to first ask, what does it mean to remobilize? And what are the different scenarios we might think about to define remobilization and understand the material needs of the U.S. defense industrial base? We're going to ask them to speak about the details, but I just wanted to kind of give the big picture in this introduction. So we've evaluated in this context baseline production, a buildup of production, and then a war rate of production. And so when we look at the results, we should think about that sort of buildup scenario being, okay, the U.S. is preparing for a more dangerous world. We're answering the call of Jerry and others to build the U.S. defense industrial base to levels which we think would provide for readiness. And then in the war rate case, you're really asking the question of what happens on the day after. What happens if we get into prolonged conflict and the U.S. needs to be producing systems that it is exhausting at the same time? So that gives us two ways of interrogating the question of how much material and then how much energy need might we have for the U.S. industrial base. We then applied an embodied energy framework to try and understand, figuring out how much energy it takes to build a missile or a interceptor can be quite challenging. So we had to break it down into material components to give us a sense of the energetic needs necessary to get all of the kit that you need for the actual warfighters. And so a lot of this is quite detailed. A lot of it is in the appendix of the report. I encourage you to check it out. For those who know about this, I encourage you to interrogate the results. We want to hear your feedback. But the basic idea is we define through these scenarios the material need in terms of products, units. We then invert from there material need in terms of things like aluminum and circuit boards and semiconductors. And we can then apply fairly standard measures of the embodied energy in those goods to get a sense of how much energy do you need for that production. This is a nice central result of the report, and I think this actually kind of gives us, there's two ways of looking at it. One, the energy need of the wartime scenario is 5 times what we commit to our production today. And that's a significant perturbation. That's a significant increase in demand for any particular sector. But I do want to emphasize that the United States has plenty of energy to meet these needs. That we in other industries throughout our economy, we use quite a bit of energy. We're an energy-rich country, and so I'm less worried, having looked at this problem and now having estimates and results to point to, that we're going to have a material shortage of energy because of any of these expansions, and that result is actually heartening. However, one of the challenges that we identified is that when we looked at where these goods are produced, if you had to expand in under a mobilization scenario production quickly, you might want to do it nearby where you already have facilities. Greenfield production in the United States is incredibly slow to activate. And so we did a mapping project trying to understand where the primary componentry that you want to have for a domestically supported defense industrial base might be made and where it might be expanded, and where, even though from a sort of overall or top-down perspective, there's plenty of energy resources to accomplish such a mobilization, where we might confront some challenges in the actual expansion of the defense industrial base. We're going to have Raj and Xander, our co-authors, talk a little bit more about these results in a moment. And then we wanted to think about reliability and deliverability, because the broader context in the United States now is about having enough energy to meet data center demand. It's about being able to build fast enough the linear infrastructure that underlies the reliability and deliverability components of our energy system so that we can actually use that energy and tie demand to supply. And so we looked both at the risks in these regions of electricity reliability and as well as the deliverability of natural gas, because natural gas is both an important component of industrial production itself, but as the cornerstone of our electricity system, the deliverability of gas is a really critically important part of expanding industrial production. If you want to read more about that and the dynamics of why we need to consider this component as well as alongside electric reliability, the National Petroleum Council published a report earlier this calendar year, maybe late last calendar year, on gas-electric coordination and the infrastructure and storage needs necessary to ensure a high reliability of the overall energy system, which is important both for our economy and for national security. So we'll talk a little bit about these results over the course of the event. And then the results also then give us sort of a sectoral sense of risk. So it's not just enough to say, admire this problem, as Jerry said, right? We all know that this is something that we need to work on, but where in our defense industrial base might we encounter challenges? And we identified in particular semiconductors and steel as being areas where rapid expansion might confront energy challenges or compound energy challenges in places that are already feeling the strain of other growing demand. In particular, funny enough, both Texas and it's actually, pause briefly, as we're working with our colleagues in security, I don't know who has the worst acronyms, if it's the energy folks or the defense people, but the PJM service region, this electricity service region, which includes Virginia, Maryland, Washington, D.C., but also importantly, Pennsylvania and the Rust Belt, where steel facilities are still located. That's an area where that's facing real challenges in expanding the electricity system. There's some challenge there as well for gas deliverability. And so if you talk about a scenario where you need to rapidly increase production in those places, you're going to confront some regional challenges or face some fairly significant trade-offs that both DOW and the rest of the government should be aware of. The last bit of the analysis does try to put this in the context of the data center development, because it is also in PJM and ERCOT that we are seeing significant data center growth. It's a little bit funny and actually a little hard to explain why the areas that are the most stressed are also the places where you might want to expand all these kinds of industrial, both knowledge and defense production. But we can get a little bit into that in the course of the discussion. But the report gives us a very interesting breakdown across all the different sort of energetic regions of the United States, both where the bulk of the challenge may be, where the data center developer demand might cause us to force trade-offs, and also some very nice resolution as to which sectors and in which places are going to need some policy attention. What do? We always want to close here with advice to policymakers who are going to be holding the bag should this challenges become critical or severe. I actually am heartened that I think the administration has this on their mind. Early in this administration, the president declared a national energy emergency, which had a sort of campy, cartoonish vibe to it when the U.S. is producing more energy than we ever have before. But to the same degree, as the more and more you look at the needs to be flexible, more secure, to reindustrialize, you see the potential for shortage. And in particular, if you understand then the challenges we have in building linear infrastructure, both in terms of wires and pipes, you start to see where you could confront real challenges in meeting our national security needs, meeting our economic needs associated with data centers, or in this context, doing those both in ways that the population can accept and doesn't cause otherwise economic harm. The reason why this is an interesting set of additional recommendations to everything you'll read that we've already published, that the National Petroleum Council has published, both in the gas electric coordination study as well as in the permitting reform study, which myself and several people were co-authors of, is the national security coordination mechanisms that we have provide additional authorities for the government to think about using in the context of an emergency. And so we've made a few recommendations for integrating energy resilience into the Department of War's supply chain risk assessments. They've been doing a much better job in thinking through where do we get the kit, the componentry that goes into the kit that eventually finds its way into the hands of our warfighters. We think energy resilience and supply could be included in that conversation. There's some ability to create dedicated permitting and finance pathways for the most critical components of the defense industrial base. And then they might consider the top recommendation here is looking at designating in particular facilities as critical components of the defense infrastructure, even though they might be commercial facilities today. So this kind of gives, these should not be thought of as the sole ways of dealing with the challenges that we're talking about or presenting in the report, but rather those that are additional when we're thinking specifically about the defense industrial base, layered on top of many of the other policy recommendations that we and others have made for addressing the broader challenge of deploying more energy and building faster here in the United States. Let me close the slide deck presentation and invite my two co-authors up to interrogate the results and hear more about their insights and possibly what I have misrepresented. Xander and Raj, please join us up on the stage. I'm going to take this with me because we can kind of click through. We have like the ability to be dynamic and excellent presenters. Let me introduce first my two co-authors. Alexander Palmer, Xander, is a fellow in the Warfare, Irregular Threats, and Terrorism program here at CSIS. He and I have been friends in the hallway and in the commuter's locker room, but he has spent a lot of time thinking through different scenarios for mobilization, and in this context led all of the work thinking about how do we properly frame both starting from our baseline, how do we properly frame rearmament? How do we think about wartime production? How do we really think about the sort of procurement strategy of the U.S. and how it might redact onto energy? And Raj Swani is an adjunct fellow, non-resident here at CSIS with my Energy Security and Climate Change program. He is also the founder and CEO of Satnam Energy, which does consultancy and research services across a variety of energy issues, both global and here in the United States. Raj led a lot of our work in this report, thinking through the embodied energy calculations, the regional assessments of energy availability and reliability. Xander, Raj, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for your contributions, and I look forward to spending a little bit of time interrogating you before I turn it over to the audience. Maybe, Xander, I can start with you. You and I sort of started talking about this project late summer, early fall. Is there anything, what's the one thing that you learned along the way that you might not have thought as we pursued this research?
I think the kind of historical kind of perspective here and looking at the situation that the United States faced kind of during World War I and in the lead up to World War II, when there was conscious thinking about mobilization for kind of large-scale great power war, and conscious thinking and government resources and specific authorities created to investigate the energy side of that equation. Obviously, we're having the first conversation today about kind of what does mobilization look like, what does production look like, how do we respond to a situation in which we end up in a protracted conflict.
Right.
But that second side of the second step, I haven't seen there be so much discussion about it. Obviously, there's kind of talk about energy dominance, energy security, that sort of thing, but I haven't seen much analysis, not to say that there's none, but I haven't seen much analysis kind of linking the two.
So, I mean, but I hear you on the historical perspective. I mean, I know you went up even to the Library of Congress looking at capturing some of these pre-World War II reports, but we're now witness to history. So can you maybe there's a lot of energy people in the room, there's a lot of energy people watching online. What is your read of the current situation in the Middle East, right? You read these headlines in the Journal and other places, the U.S. has shot off all of its interceptors. We heard from Jerry that we're moving Patriot batteries from Asia to the Middle East. How, just for if I'm just an energy person, and that's where I spend most of my day, how concerned should people be about the ability of the U.S. to rebuild after today's conflict, and what does that imply for the future of defense industrial production?
I think it's going to be difficult to rebuild. at least quickly. The problem that you encounter in these types of situations, right, is that you don't know when you're going to need what you've just fired off, right? Where the United States is using an enormous amount of kind of munitions, using an enormous amount of interceptors, is kind of using up readiness in various forms. And sure, the United States is capable of building those things back, but the question is, how quickly are you going to need it? How many of these things are you going to need to produce in a year?
You hear really frightening numbers, right? You
Yes.
hear like we shot off in the first days of this conflict years of production of some of the missiles that we were using in the first part of this conflict. Is that correct?
As far as I know, yes. I have no reason to doubt the kind of things that the DOW is saying on this.
Yeah.
They have much better information than I do. One thing that they're doing, though, is they are talking about kind of quadrupling the production of these critical munitions. There was just an announcement yesterday that the Department of the Air Force is considering kind of expanding collaborative combat aircraft production dramatically. Now, that's not being used today, but that's that kind of next generation technology and next generation platform that is going to make up kind of the what the defense people talk about in terms of affordable mass, right? And that's what is shifting a lot of the weight in the analysis away from kind of the large platforms, battleships, aircraft carriers, destroyers, and towards munitions, towards CCAs, the collaborative combat aircraft, towards kind of the modular attack surface craft, autonomous surface vehicles, autonomous subsurface vehicles, and that's shifting the burden away from kind of those materials like steel and towards kind of things like aluminum, towards kind of really electronics.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things I learned I originally, when we started this project, I was like, oh, the shipbuilding is going to be a big problem. But when you actually think about the reinvigoration of the DIB in today's world, that's just not what we would do. You shift to, the sort of the drones, missiles, and that shifts but like from an energy standpoint, that doesn't necessarily get you out of trouble because those are all high energetic goods, and then the whole point is you're using a lot of them.
No, it may actually get you in more trouble, right? Because you're using a lot more of them, and unlike a Arleigh Burke, the missile doesn't come back to be rebuilt. The stuff that you put into it is gone forever, and you need to replace that at a much higher rate than you need to replace, combat aircraft, warships, that sort of thing. And that's why we're moving in this direction, right? Because you want the attritable systems to be things that you can build in large numbers, and they don't have people on them, right? You want to be able to protect the people who are manning these other platforms.
Yeah. Raj, the way that we tried to represent this, right, because we never exactly know what procurement would look like, is through these embodied energy calculations. Can you give us a sense of kind of like how those worked? How solid do we think those numbers are?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, if anything, the numbers you saw are lower bounds on real estimates, right? In terms of data availability, the Department of Defense is not handing out how much energy it takes to make military production steel or to sort of put these munitions together. And so I'd say, we use as much data as we can, but almost certainly the numbers you see are lower bounds on what actual munitions production would require.
But does it also give us some sense of, I don't want to say confidence, but does it give us some sense of accuracy in the final result? Because once we're down at the material level, sort of how that material is used, whether it's put into fighter jets of some kind or into these smaller vehicles or whatever, that gives us kind of a bulk picture of the energy.
Absolutely.
So were you pleased or surprised when you found that even a wartime mobilization, contrary to what the country experienced in World War I and World War II and prior to World War II, wouldn't actually be this incredible energy black hole that we thought it might be at the start?
Yeah, I mean, I guess pleased is probably pleased and then surprised.
Comforted.
Comforted initially. I mean, we all know the U.S. has as much gas as it as it really needs and as probably the world needs available to it. And so in terms of at a national scale, the energy is there and ready to use. I think surprised primarily because when we sort of do this facility level concentration, we really need to build more of everything. And so that's gas infrastructure, that's transmission lines, that's generation, that's production, et cetera. Because that's the only way you build resilience in these facilities. So in spite of the fact that we have enough energy, if we can't build the energy infrastructure fast enough to support these facilities, it's sort of pointless.
And we arrived at PJM and ERCOT as particular areas of concern. Can you explain a little bit from your perspective why that is? Yeah,
absolutely. So I think in general, over the past 5 to 10 years, that the U.S. electricity sector has become less resilient. And that's for a variety of reasons, right? One is that we have all of this infrastructure that was built 40 or 50 years ago that needs to be refurbished, et cetera. Two is, for the first time in 20-ish years, the U.S. is facing load growth increases, right? We're expecting more load growth. And so if you look at sort of the metrics that we use here and you go back, not just from sort of 2025, but to 2010 and 2015, all of the metrics are sort of getting worse on their own. Now the reason ERCOT and PJM in particular are important is because they're also facing, so they face these sort of same issues, and if anything, more acutely. They're also facing significant pressure from data centers, both of which, right, like we need to be able to power these data centers alongside provide resilience to our industrial base. And it's really this data center demand that introduces a lot of pressure on the existing system and makes it really, really critical that we're able to build in these places.
The regionality of the defense industrial base, or at least U.S. production of the materials we use in the defense industrial base, ends up being one of the biggest messages coming out of this. I see in some of it, actually, I would argue a little bit of fragility, right? So in the case of titanium sponge, there's only a couple of facilities in the country that we use to make this incredibly important good for the defense industrial base. Both of them happen to be in PJM. I'll ask the hard version of the question. Should we consider PJM a national security risk?
Yeah, putting me on the spot, I think.
That's a think tank question, by the way. That was really good.
Yeah. From the analysis that we've done, I think the answer is yes. Look, I don't want to paint the picture that your lights are going to turn off if you have a house in the PJM electricity region. Like these systems are complicated and there's much more fine-grained regional analysis that needs to be done. But the fact remains that our electricity system is degrading and we have increasing load growth. And so we have to be able to address these things. I would like to sort of reframe that as more of an opportunity, right? Like for the first time, we have a real opportunity for the U.S. federal government to sort of like quantify the positive externality of national security that these facilities provide. Right. And so if we can sort of funnel public financing, like we discussed, in some of the conclusions, to these areas, when you build a transmission line or a gas pipeline, that has sort of system-wide effects. Right. You both are able to secure the facility that you're looking at, and you provide extra capability for the system to load on more data centers, lower rates for consumers, et cetera.
Sander, one of the recommendations we make is that the DOW should look at the critical underlying infrastructure, the power and gas infrastructure, as a component of its supply chain risk and resilience assessments. The DOW already has a lot of critics saying they're not really even thinking about the vulnerability on the material side of things. It's not really known. The depth of where things come from in DOW procurement gets real hazy 1 or 2 levels down. Are we asking them to add on to something that's already not working?
No, I think that people at the department are really serious about tackling this problem, and the department has been improving kind of its visibility into its supply chains. The GAO kind of had a report, I think about a year and a half ago, maybe a year ago. The department is kind of ahead of the rest of the federal government on visibility into supply chains, but it remains a really difficult problem. These are complex multinational supply chains. something that goes into an F-35 is going to be made on kind of multiple continents and cross national borders many, many times. Some of these things are going to be kind of proprietary data, so it's a really difficult problem, but people are taking it seriously. I don't think that there's any reason to believe that the folks over at the Pentagon don't understand this threat. I think they're quite concerned about it.
All right, so I'm gonna, folks in the room, do we have a microphone available? I think we will open for a couple questions if you all have got them, but I'll take one last crack. As you think about this challenge, Xander first, we built these scenarios, right? We had to make assumptions about how much we would need for different kinds of scenarios. If you were to add one more, kind of if you think about what's next, kind of what is in your mind for how the U.S. is thinking about defense procurement?
I think that, I mean, the biggest takeaway when you talk about scenarios at all, right, is that we're wrong. Like, we're going to be wrong. What we're producing in 10 years is not going to be kind of what's in this paper here. And I think the big takeaway there is that this is should just be the beginning of a process, right? This should be the beginning of kind of constant reassessment of mobilization plans, constant reassessment of kind of energy requirements. I think the scenario that we're seeing that we probably didn't go far enough kind of along the line is along this kind of affordable mass line.
Okay.
We talk about kind of these are probably underestimates in a lot of ways, but it could be a serious underestimate of certain things if we really go towards this kind of fully autonomous, kind of very, very expendable, attritable force design and force structure, and really kind of we don't assume any disinvestment from legacy platforms here. We just assume slower growth, but you could have a radically different makeup of the force. And what that means in practice, kind of as the analysis kind of you and Raj did really shows, is it changes the geography of strain, and it changes the geography of demand. And I think that that's sort of the biggest thing that I'll be thinking about, kind of considering in the future in terms of the scenarios themselves.
Raj, when we were working on this project, one of the things we confronted is it's very hard to, on one chart, look at the multiple vectors of risk that we have in our energy system because of the tight linkage between gas and electricity. Do we have the right tools in the toolbox for evaluating these kinds of risks, and how do we continue to push the boundary there?
Yeah, so I think we definitely have the right tools. It's a matter of one, working on data availability, right? So to really enact change from this kind of analysis, you need the best data you can find. And then the second thing I would say there is I think it's really important that we frame this demand generally for energy as an opportunity alongside a risk.
Yeah.
Right? Demand is good, load growth is good, because especially in cases like this, because it allows a pathway for us to funnel new funds into infrastructure that has public benefit. Right? So if we're identifying issues in PJM and ERCOT, we should be doing more to think about how we can secure facilities in these places by building infrastructure. And that infrastructure can serve multiple purposes.
Right, thank you. Let's turn to the room. We've got time for a question. If anybody's got one for our authors or myself. Fully explained. That gives me a chance for two more. If one comes up, just raise your hand and we'll bring a microphone over. In terms of the things that we've learned along the way, Raj, maybe I'll invert the question. Earlier I asked you about energy. What did you learn about defense production in the pursuit of this research that other energy analysts might want to know?
I think the first thing is that defense definitely has worse acronyms than energy. Slogging through munitions, no offense, Xander, but that was brutal. No, I think the big thing is there's this immense reliance on the industrial base that I hadn't really fully considered yet. And in particular, steel, titanium, and aluminum capacity, we probably should just be building generally because we only have a few facilities. But that there is this like real interconnection there, and that there are like real energy needs between these these facilities, and they face real resilience risks, things that I hadn't considered before.
And then, Xander, on your end, what did you learn about energy that you think your defense colleagues ought to understand better?
It's very complicated. Energy is very complicated. I mean, I think that when people think about energy, they tend to think about kind of what we're seeing in the Strait of Hormuz right now, kind of the energy weapon. But I think that people don't think about it as a constraint on defense production. And I think at a national level, our analysis suggests that that's probably right, but like we don't live at a national level, right? We live at a regional level, we live at a facility level. And I think understanding kind of the fine-grained geography of energy supply is going to be really important. I also learned a bunch about kind of other forms of kind of energy use that didn't find their way into this analysis simply because of kind of the scope and the research question. But I think that there's a whole lot of analysis to be done on kind of the potential adversarial action against energy facilities, against the grid, that sort of thing. Obviously, that's there's a fair bit of that being done in kind of the cyber realm.
In one of our early roundtables, I mean, availability was not a question of supply. It was if we were in a prolonged conflict with a near peer, the grid nearby all of these bespoke industrial facilities would be attacked physically, if not in cyberspace.
Yeah, and the department's thinking about this stuff, particularly in terms of kind of military facilities. But I think there needs to be sort of expansion of that thinking to kind of what is that defense critical infrastructure, right? And then there's of course the question of you have this energy, right? How do you get it to the edge, right? How do you how many tankers do you need to bring energy forward? Are you going to be doing kind of battery charging near the front line as kind of they're doing in Ukraine? And we're sort of entering into a world of, particularly if the kind of anti-access area denial threats are kind of the way we think about them, right? That's going to be very, very difficult, and they're going to be really hard questions to be answered about operational energy.
On my own part, I learned a couple things that I thought were really interesting. One, the importance of California to the defense industrial base actually surprised me a little bit, given the energy constraints that state now feels, though I understand historically why that's the case. I also learned that when you take this materials framework to heart, that I had convinced myself, military procurements, we'll shift from the F-35 to small drones, and that'll be much easier to build. But it turns out that the esoteric polymers and laminates that we use to avoid radar detection are used in the little stuff as well as the big stuff. And so the bulk material needs of the defense industrial base really, for me, became the right way to think about this challenge. Richard, go ahead. Please introduce yourself.
American Gas Association. Really terrific analysis and report. Congratulations. Just picking up what you said, this does sound like the beginning of a conversation and more analysis to bring this type of thinking to stakeholders. And so kind of a two-part question. You can figure out which parts, if any, you want to answer. One, what kind of additional kind of analysis metrics might be helpful as we think about those gas deliverability challenges? I think you talked a lot about the electricity side, but I think that there's more ways we can quantify some of those challenges on the base infrastructure. But then related to that, and maybe at a higher level, a lot of the infrastructure decisions here are not nationally based. They're locally based. ERCOT, PJM, the utility service territories were to regulate at a state level. So how do we translate these findings to the language that will resonate with those local stakeholders so that they understand the value and the public service that this infrastructure provides extends beyond maybe some of the typical metrics they're thinking about?
It's a great question. Raj, why don't you start with the gas deliverability metrics? We had quite a bit of back and forth as the Auschwitz CHIP team trying to figure out the right ones, and then I can address the second part.
Yeah, so I think for the electricity system, as you mentioned, right, there's sort of a clear-cut way to measure resilience, particularly because there's monitoring, right? So the DOE monitors, in every county, the electricity system on like a 15-minute interval, right? And so we can generate metrics like this. For gas deliverability in particular, that data is a lot harder to come by. And so in general, right, like we need to be able to understand at a higher level, and sorry, by higher level, I mean finer geographically, where these pipelines go and what storage facilities exist and their sort of current levels and capacities. And in particular, we need to be able to do this monitoring, maybe not at the same 15-minute resolution, but at a time frame that allows us to understand the changes in resilience and reliability of these systems. And so that doesn't really exist currently, right? And so we had to use, a variety of proxy metrics to estimate gas deliverability, primarily based on price. And when you do that, you end up sort of over-evaluating one end and under-evaluating the other. There are trade-offs to these sort of imperfect metrics. So in general, we need better monitoring. And of course, the solution writ large is you just have to build more of these things in more of these places. But to understand where that needs to happen and at what levels it needs to happen, we definitely need to do more monitoring specifically in the areas we outline.
And your second point, Richard, the question is sort of how do you make what's the policy rub? There's two areas I think I'm really interested in pursuing further work. We mentioned here in the second tranche of recommendations, creating dedicated permitting and financing pathways. There really are authorities that can be used by the DOW, by the Army Corps, to develop industrial facilities that will support defense and production. I know that that's on the mind of some in the administration. It's actually, they even remarked on that in the Energy Emergency Declaration from the first days of the administration. Figuring out exactly how you do that and how you do it in a way that's politically acceptable, I think, are both going to be key challenges. Your question about support at the local level calls to mind an article from the New York Times, maybe about 6 months or a year ago, about a mine in Nebraska, which was producing rare earth goods, which are important for defense production. And like any mine, mines are sort of like more challenged than pipelines or transmission projects as being from the sort of the forces of NIMBYism. And there was a real effort by local government, by citizen groups, by the companies running the operation to emphasize the connection between the national security and this kinds of production, which did seem to change the way people thought about it from a sort of local politics perspective. And it would be interesting, that's not exactly our realm, but it's an interesting way to think about this using, if you were to create some of those authorities and then use them, how you would market that. I want to thank everybody. Oh, Karen, did you like? Yeah, please.
One last
yeah.
question.
They're gonna pull us off stage in 3 minutes, but go ahead.
One last question. I'm going to give you the opportunity to tie these two different reports together.
Yes.
So natural gas is the enabler of the economy of the future, advanced
Right.
manufacturing, re-onshoring, that was one report. And now we're demonstrating natural gas, the energy system, as another great enabler of the future of the military industrial base.
Right.
So can you tie together how we're going to get out the message of being the enabler of the future?
Well, in this case, it's totally market reality that gas is the backbone of our system. So much of the demand in both reports, we talked about expanding industrial production for different reasons and with different forces and different financing mechanisms. But I would say, what are the things that really connect for me? One, the role of electricity as an intermediary cannot be ignored. That is, modern industrial facilities typically are going to be charged with electricity. Thinking of the blast furnaces of old is not exactly how you should think about things. Given the role that gas plays in our electricity system, it is like a fundamental part of meeting this new demand. That raises concerns and challenges and opportunities. On the opportunity side, it means we can actually meet growing demand, which would be nice. On the challenges side, you've got a couple. One, are you going to interrupt reliability? Are you going to increase prices too much? Those are questions of infrastructure. And the last one is, and this is less an issue in the defense industrial base, but is for commercial actors, what does this mean for the carbon intensity of the production in the United States? In all those cases, gas provides a lot of really helpful attributes. whether or not, how we choose to navigate, how we set up our long-term strategy for market activity, I think is going to be very different from how we're going to do this sort of national security-based things. But the reality is, as he contradicts himself, so much of this production is matched between the commercial world and the defense world. And so I look forward to seeing more tie-in. Obviously, the considerations between them will be different, but the general nature of our energy system and its potential growth, resonates between the two. Also, we need to accomplish all the permitting reform that we. Yeah. Let me thank everyone for joining us today. Colleagues who've joined us online, thank you so much. I do encourage you to check out the report. This has some interesting new methodology for us here at CSIS. It's quite rigorous. We're open to your feedback, as I said, and please look forward to future work from us on this front, particularly thinking about how do we get all the necessary stuff built so that we can meet the challenges of the future with our full national strength behind us. Please also thank my co-authors for being up here and subjecting themselves to my treatment. And one last word of appreciation to AGF for their support for this research. And thank you all for joining us. We'll see you next time. This is Joseph Mikett signing off.